For some reason, the protagonist of this story, Lest Albion, had been reincarnated into the world of a game he played countless times in his previous life. In that storyline, Lest wasn't the hero, but a villainous noble destined to die halfway through the story. For the first few years after his reincarnation, Lest led a fairly normal life, sheltered from the war. It was during a special ritual when he turned 14 that he recovered his memories. This was known as the Divine Oracle Ceremony, where the youth received an ability granted by the goddess. On that occasion, Lest received an ability called Taming, considered by people to be one of the most useless skills, as it was only good for controlling horses, pigeons, or other similar animals. The news eventually enraged his father. The Albion family had been recognized for generations as a cradle of great swordsmen, so he expected his son to receive a combat ability, something like Sword Saint or another outstanding martial technique. But seeing that Lest only possessed a useless gift, he didn't hesitate to despise him, considering him unworthy of the Albion name. His older brothers were also quick to mock him, demeaning and insulting him for his lack of worth. Both were competing to inherit the family title, and the existence of an incapable brother only simplified their dispute. The priest in charge of the ceremony, noticing the humiliation, tried to encourage Lest, assuring him that there must be a greater reason behind that gift. It was then that Lest remembered the truth. He was inside Symphony of Sword and Sorcery, the game he used to complete in his past life. What was most surprising was that he hadn't reincarnated as the protagonist, but as the secondary antagonist, the one who would die at the hands of a commander from the Demon King's army. As a veteran player, he knew well that, regardless of the route taken, this fate was inescapable. After the ceremony, he began to review everything he knew about the game. Taming, although to everyone else it was a useless talent, actually hid a secret. It didn't just allow him to control animals, but also monsters. In the original story, Lest discovered this power far too late. By then, years of hatred and persecution had corrupted his heart, and he ended up using his ability to cause harm. This abuse attracted the attention of the Demon King's army, which ultimately stripped him of his power and killed him. Aware of this, Lest understood that even if he tried to avoid the tragedy, as long as he possessed that ability, he would always be pursued. But with his memories as a player, he was determined to break the death flag. If he managed to grow strong enough, he planned to take control of the country with his own hands. He had 1 year before the game's plot began, so he intended to make the most of it to change his fate. The first obstacle was his own family. During a dinner, his twin brothers, Edward and Sidor, were showing off in front of him, and their father, Marquis Godalby. Their mother, proud of her 2 older sons, didn't hesitate to call her other son Lest an embarrassment because of his trash ability. The twins ridiculed him, saying that if he had been born into a family of cattle ranchers, his ability would have been useful. When Lest tried to defend himself, his father contemptuously told him to shut up. In such a hostile environment, the boy decided to leave for a walk. A week had already passed since he recovered his memories. Although he couldn't check his stats like in the game, he soon understood that this world followed the same mechanics. You had to defeat monsters to get stronger. Moreover, he could only tame creatures he personally defeated. Therefore, if he wanted to control powerful monsters, he first had to improve his own attributes. He then remembered the daily game event called Midnight Training, a practice that increased specific skills. Here, however, he wasn't limited to a single session or the nighttime, allowing him to train relentlessly and grow at a monstrous pace. He wouldn't limit himself to physical strength. He also planned to perfect his magic. Thanks to the memories of Lest's life in this world, he managed to get through his first magic refinement session without any issues. He even noticed that his body was already superior to the average person's, which showed that he had been training hard until now. Perhaps, in the game, the despair after receiving that useless ability was what pushed him to try harder. After a day of training, he began to contemplate whether he should go on his own without telling him. To his surprise, upon arriving, he ran into his brothers who were heading to their sword training. As usual, they harassed him with taunts. Edward possessed the great swordsman ability, and Sidor had the natural swordsman skill, so they looked down on their younger brother with contempt. It was in the middle of this scene that a young woman appeared, surprising everyone. Elna Lubricel, the personal trainer for the twins. She was carrying none other than a giant earth dragon, which she claimed to have defeated on her way there. Although she was only 18 years old, Elna already held the rank of an S-rank adventurer and was known as a sword genius. However, Lest knew nothing about her, as she didn't appear in the game. The only thing he knew about the young woman came from his own memories as Lest. In the game, S-rank adventurers were relatively common, but seeing her in person was overwhelming. Witnessing how incredible Elna was, Les couldn't help but feel jealous and frustrated for not being able to train under the guidance of someone like her. 2 hours later, in the Albion family's grand training hall, Elna was making the twins sweat with brutal intensity. While they struggled, Les hid to observe more of her skills. Just as he expected, Elna was a formidable warrior. Seeing how she treated 2 expert swordsmen as if they were children left him completely astonished. Exhausted, the twins ended up surrendering. Witnessing this, Les understood that although he could increase his stats with training, he would never learn true combat techniques on his own. Since Elna visited the Albion mansion once a month, he couldn't waste the opportunity. He had to ask her to train him too. But before he could even dare to speak to her, Elna had already noticed him. With the agility of a shadow, she appeared behind him without him realizing it. Les stood up and introduced himself, and she immediately recognized who he was. A little nervous, but determined, he gathered his courage and confessed that he also wanted to become strong. He asked her to teach him how to fight with a sword. However, she didn't. She immediately clarified that his taming ability was not for combat, which was why he hadn't been selected as her pupil. Elna agreed that without a sword-related skill, Les wouldn't survive her regiment. Still, the determination in the boy's eyes made her accept his request. Quick as a flash, she handed him a wooden sword to test him. She needed to know if he was truly worth training, and to prove it, he had to face her himself. Every move the young woman made was swift and heavy, making it clear she was in another league. Although she was holding back, Les understood that a single mistake would be enough to knock him out on the spot. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stand up to her strength. After more than 10 minutes of combat, his legs could no longer support him. Seeing his exhaustion, Elna stopped the fight and listened to Les' request to receive her critique. She was honest. His physical ability barely met the minimum, and his swordsmanship was that of an absolute beginner. Even so, she wanted to know why he longed for power so much. Did he want to master the sword? Surpass his brothers? Or was there another reason? Firmly, Les declared that he was doing it because he wanted to overcome fate itself. The answer surprised Elna, as she had never seen such determination in any of her students. Therefore, she decided to grant him 30 minutes of personal training each time she visited the mansion. However, she warned him, if on the contrary, she ever saw him slacking off, she would abandon him without hesitation. Convinced, Les promised he would never give her a reason to, as he wouldn't see her again. For another month, he had to train on his own until her next visit. 2 months passed, and it was now the 3rd training day for Les with Elna. At first, she thought he hadn't progressed, as his movements were still predictable. But to her surprise, Les had developed what he called techniques, something none of her other students had been able to show her before. In the game, techniques were just as important as abilities, or even more so, they were finishing moves that allowed one to surpass their own limits. In that time, Les had managed to learn a high-speed and powerful slash called Blade Surge, Full Drive Flash, for the first time in her career. As a teacher, Elna faced a student capable of getting close enough to strike her. Although she was still much stronger and blocked the attack with ease, she was left speechless at Les' astonishing progress. He had only been practicing swordsmanship for 2 months and was already almost at the level of his brothers, who had a 6-month head start. The intensity of his training, forged in blood, sweat, and tears, was evident, but even that didn't fully explain his advancement. Furthermore, the flash technique was designed for users of sword abilities. Even with all this talent, anyone without a combat class would have taken at least a year to master it. Les had achieved it in just 2 months, making Elna wonder if she was training a true prodigy, a diamond, in the rough that surpassed all imagination. Meanwhile, although Les felt frustrated for not having managed to touch her even once, he also felt fortunate. Thanks to Elna, he had improved more than he ever could have hoped. So far, everything was going according to plan. He thought that if he was careful not to run into the protagonist or the characters destined to be his enemies, he would be able to challenge and overcome his own destiny. Suddenly, his father, the Marquis, informed him one night that Charlotte, the second princess, would be visiting their mansion. Les tried to remember who this character was until it dawned on him. She was the main heroine of the game, the second princess of the Final Kingdom, and for him, a walking death flag. If he had to describe her in one sentence, it would be the perfect princess in every way. Like any young person of royal blood, she was curious about the world and made friends easily. She had a pure heart and was considerate to everyone, regardless of their social status. Even with her extraordinary talents, she trained constantly, driven by a strong sense of justice and the desire to protect her people. Precisely because she was like this, she could not forgive less actions that harmed others. That's why, in the course of the story, Charlotte ended up allying with the protagonist to confront him. As a consequence of that battle, Les died at the hands of a demon Lord Executive. However, according to the original story, there shouldn't be any connection between him and Charlotte at this point, so he wondered why the plot had changed. The answer was Elna, who was also the royal family's fencing instructor. She had mentioned to Her Highness about a talented swordsman from the Albion family, which piqued Charlotte's curiosity and motivated her to meet him in person. The Marquis and his wife, convinced she was talking about the twins, celebrated the news without imagining that it was actually Les who had caught the princess's interest. Realizing that he had altered the course of the game, Les began to think about how to fix it. 2 weeks later, the day of the official visit arrived. Les, along with his brothers, awaited the princess's arrival. However, the twins ordered him to step aside, convinced that she was interested in them. Without arguing, Les immediately withdrew. While the twins attended to Charlotte, he planned to use his time to train by fighting monsters. The Arkwood Forest was a dangerous habitat that stretched across the Albion territory, and entry was forbidden until enrolling in the Royal Academy. Since he didn't want to stand out too much yet, he decided to postpone that idea. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Charlotte had already arrived and was enjoying snacks with the twins and the Marquis. In addition to her radiant beauty, the twins were impressed with her ability, Holy Sword Princess, an elite technique that enhanced both holy magic and swordsmanship, even surpassing the Sword Saint ability their older brother at the academy possessed. Fascinated, the princess asked to see them fight. The twins gladly accepted and began a duel. To their surprise, Charlotte wasn't too impressed, as their skills were nothing exceptional. Fearing they would lose her interest, they decided to show her true combat prowess by facing monsters in the Arkwood Forest. Charlotte was shocked. She knew the twins' strength was not yet enough to face those creatures, but they, blinded by their confidence, assured her they could do it. She hesitated to allow it, but in the end, she had no choice but to accompany them. Moments later, Charlotte, her twin hosts, and her personal assistant, Estella, entered the forest. The tension was palpable. The princess was sweating slightly as she observed the dark surroundings despite it being broad daylight. The twins, smiling, tried to reassure her, saying they had everything under control. In the middle of the tour, the princess remembered that the twins had another brother their age and asked about him. The twins looked at each other uncomfortably and then lied, assuring her that Les had gone out alone, implying he wasn't someone worth meeting due to his mediocre skills. At that moment, a gray wolf, an E-rank monster, appeared suddenly and attacked them. The twins reacted quickly and managed to defeat the monster, but the princess noticed that their skills were not as remarkable as they seemed. Estella, on the other hand, sensed something unsettling and warned that it was better to retreat immediately. At her insistence, Charlotte asked for the reason, and her assistant explained that she felt in nearby danger. The twins, bent on impressing her, refused to leave and continued onward. It wasn't long before a more fearsome enemy appeared, a C-rank hurricane wolf, much more dangerous than the last. The beast charged at high speed, and Estella intervened immediately, blocking its first attack. She ordered the twins to take the princess and flee. They obeyed, but during their escape, another wolf cut off their path, cornering them. With no other way out, Charlotte was forced to use her magic while the twins could barely stay on their feet, unable to land a decisive blow. Despite her efforts, the overwhelming force of the hurricane wolf began to wear her down, putting her in a critical situation. Just as the creature was about to deliver a fatal blow, help appeared. Les intervened, completely blocking the monster's attack and saving the princess from certain death. A few minutes earlier, Les had noticed Princess Charlotte, along with her maid Estella, entering the Arkwood Forest accompanied by his brothers. Without hesitation, he ran after them, aware of how dangerous that forbidden place was. Realizing his brothers were only there to impress the princess, Les sped up even more, determined to get there in time. As they walked through the forest, he remained hidden in the shadows, jumping from tree to tree, watching in secret. Although most of the creatures in the forest were low rank and the twins could handle them, if they ran into a powerful enemy and Charlotte got hurt, or worse, died, it wouldn't be surprising if the entire Albion family ended up executed. Therefore, Les swore to follow them at all costs. And just as he suspected, his instinct was right. Back in the present, Les intervened just in time to protect the princess from the attack. It was a very close call, so much so that even he was nearly taken out by the beast. However, he breathed a sigh of relief for having arrived in time, as otherwise Charlotte would already be seriously injured. Seeing him appear so suddenly, Charlotte asked who he was. At that moment, Les remembered he should introduce himself, although he had no intention of meeting her yet. Trapped by his brother's incompetence, he found himself forced into this situation. Still, he wished to keep his identity hidden. Instead of giving his name, he said he was a simple passerby. Charlotte couldn't believe it. It was impossible for a commoner to be strolling in such a dangerous place. She wanted to ask him more questions, but Les urged her to save the talk for later, as he first had to deal with the beast. She understood immediately and gave him space. The Hurricane Wolf was a C-rank monster capable of freely manipulating wind magic, making it a formidable opponent. Even with his current strength, Les knew that facing it head-on gave him only a 40 to 50% chance of winning. Even so, he trusted the knowledge he gained from the game and remained optimistic that he could defeat it. The monster launched another attack, which Les dodged, placing himself in front of Charlotte to protect her. However, the fight continued. The fight was difficult. The creature had a varied repertoire of attacks with hardly any openings, both up close and from a distance. Les was struggling to counterattack. It was no wonder. Hurricane wolves were famous for their lethal balance of attack and defense. But Les was no ordinary citizen. As an experienced player of the original game, he knew the attack pattern of this monster perfectly. Thanks to this, he managed to land a solid blow, leaving Charlotte, who was watching from the side, stunned. The princess began to wonder who this man was, although the wolf's physical and magical abilities were not much different from her own. Les managed to strike the beast again and again in a way that even she couldn't match. She then remembered her training with Elna. Since obtaining the title of Holy Sword Princess, she had been pushing herself harder than ever, aware that there were people with superior sword and magic skills. That's why she didn't allow herself to rest or lose to others. Elna always motivated her, but also warned her that not all rivals were great ability wielders. She told her about someone like Lest, a young man without exceptional gifts, but who, thanks to his talent and effort, had achieved a power capable of rivaling hers. On that occasion, Elna revealed that this boy belonged to the Albion family and was the same age as her. Although Charlotte hadn't thought about visiting that house, when her teacher suggested meeting him as an incentive to improve, her curiosity was immediately piqued. Now, seeing with her own eyes how Lest fought against such a powerful creature, Charlotte understood that the young man Elna had spoken of was him. And although his innate ability was considered useless, she was facing a genius who defied all standards. Mesmerized by his skill, Charlotte could barely react when Les took the final initiative. The monster, exhausted of magical energy, changed its target and went after her. In a flash, Les intercepted it, and with his sword crushed the beast's head using his technique, Single Flash. What for anyone else would have been an arduous battle, he resolved with such ease that it left even Charlotte, one of the strongest ability wielders in the kingdom, speechless. However, Les didn't celebrate the victory. He knew that it was too soon to do so, because for someone like him, a tamer, the real test was just beginning. With the Hurricane Wolf finally defeated, Charlotte came forward and thanked Les for saving her. Hearing the princess say his name left him in shock, as he never imagined she knew who he was. When he asked her how she knew, Charlotte didn't answer directly. Instead, she mentioned that she had the same wooden sword he was holding, a gift that Elna had given to each of them separately. To formalize the meeting, Charlotte introduced herself as the princess of the Final Kingdom and informed him that she was also a disciple of the same swordmaster. To the princess's surprise, the princess did not hesitate to bow to him and express her deepest gratitude for protecting her. Furthermore, she confessed that both his bravery and his skill with the sword had moved her. Les tried to downplay it, pretending that what he had done was nothing extraordinary, but the princess continued to thank him. Her wide smile flustered him, and before she noticed he was blushing, Les excused himself, saying he had to check on the Hurricane Wolf. He also took the opportunity to ask the princess to look after his brothers in the meantime, to which Charlotte immediately agreed. Approaching the monster, Les saw that it was at least 20 times larger than him. Since everything had gone well up to that point, all that remained was to see if the beast would agree to serve him. Checking his panel, he was surprised to read that the hurricane wolf had recognized his strength and was willing to obey him. Without a doubt, Lest accepted and pressed yes. Thrilled to have tamed his first monster, he gently stroked its fur. Moments later, the system informed him that the process was successful and that a part of the beast's power now belonged to him. In this way, Lest had acquired wind magic. As an additional reward, he unlocked the interdimensional sanctuary for his first successful taming. Feeling the flow of energy course through him, Lest understood in that moment why his game version believed he could become the strongest. It wasn't just about controlling monsters. His ability allowed him to absorb part of their physical capabilities and even their unique techniques. In this case, he had inherited wind magic. In the game, that power had consumed him to the point of ruin, but this time was different. He had trained hard, sought Elna's advice, and perfected his swordsmanship. Now he didn't plan to waste any of it. His goal would be to tame more creatures, because the more he tamed, the stronger he would become. Convinced of his mission, that he was on the path to becoming the strongest in the world, he decided to give his new creature a name. He chose something simple, Gale. However, aware of how strange it would be to have such a pet, he resolved to keep its existence a secret. To test his new ability, he used the interdimensional sanctuary and hid the wolf there. Moments later, Estella appeared, running towards the princess, worried for her well-being. Charlotte, who was with the twins, smiled at her and told her that another hurricane wolf had appeared, but they managed to repel it. Estella was stunned and asked if it was the princess who faced it or if the boys protected her. Proudly, Charlotte revealed that it was Lest who had saved her. Estella couldn't believe it. Lest was known for his useless ability, but Charlotte insisted she had seen it with her own eyes, without a doubt. Faced with that, Lest had no choice but to admit it and explain that it was a tough battle, but in the end, he managed to win. Estella thanked him with sincerity and promised she would find a way to thank him as he deserved. At that moment, Lest understood that he had to be much more careful when interacting with the game's characters, or he could get into serious trouble. Even so, he helped Charlotte and Estella get his brothers out of the forest before another threat appeared. Upon returning to the mansion, almost all the maids were distressed. No one understood where the twins and a princess had disappeared during their training. However, before explaining to anyone, Lest ordered them to first attend to Her Highness's injuries. Immediately, they brought medicine, towels, and water to care for her. The Marquis, seeing that Lest was the only one unharmed, accused him of having done something to the others. But the princess instantly defended him, assuring him that not only had he done nothing wrong, but in fact, he was the one who saved her life. The revelation left the Marquis speechless. He would have never imagined that his looked-down-upon son was capable of such a feat. Estella then proceeded to explain everything that had happened. She began by explaining that both she and Charlotte had been led by the twins into the Arkwood Forest, which, according to the boys, they explored frequently. However, during the journey, they encountered two C-rank hurricane wolves, which led to the dangerous situation they ended up in. Hearing that his own sons had taken the princess to that place, the Marquis was in disbelief. Estella, as a precaution, asked him directly if he really allowed his sons to enter a forest where such dangerous monsters appeared. The Marquis immediately denied it, assuring her that he had never authorized such a thing and that his sons must have gone without permission. Estella made it clear that, in that case, the responsibility fell on him as the head of the house, since his charge had been exposed to danger. The Marquis began to get nervous at the possibility of being punished by the king for his son's actions. But Charlotte, aware that she and Estella had also acted recklessly by believing the twins' word, decided not to aggravate the situation. More importantly, since Lest had faced the hurricane wolf on his own and saved her life, she considered it fair to overlook the incident in honor of his bravery. The Marquis, however, couldn't believe what he was hearing. He found it impossible to accept that his most useless son had managed to defeat a hurricane wolf. While he struggled between confusion and frustration, Lest avoided looking him in the eye. Given the exhausting day, Charlotte asked the Marquis to guide them to their rooms to rest. After she left, she approached Lest once more and assured him that she would thank him properly later. The princess went to her room, while the Marquis was left pondering how it was possible that his son could have done something like that. That night, Charlotte and her attendant also stayed at the mansion. Late into the night, Lest couldn't fall asleep, remembering what had happened hours before. He decided to go out for a bit of training, but in the hallway, he unexpectedly ran into Charlotte, dressed in a delicate blue and white nightgown that enhanced her beauty even more. Seeing him, she couldn't hide her joy. Now that they were alone, she took the opportunity to speak with him privately. Once more, Charlotte thanked him sincerely, as she was sure that if it weren't for his intervention, she would have lost her life. Lest immediately asked her to raise her head, as it was disrespectful to allow a princess to bow to him. He then confessed that the only thing that mattered was that she was safe, leaving Charlotte with the impression that Lest was, truly, a kind person. The princess continued the conversation to express her amazement at Lest's skill with the sword. His prowess had impressed her deeply, and she concluded that this strength was no coincidence, but a part of who he really was. They both began to praise each other until they blushed, although they soon returned to a serious tone. Charlotte was so kind and open with him that she even acknowledged that this experience had made her realize how much she still had to learn. Her decision made, Charlotte, blushing slightly, asked Les to become her sworn friend. He was confused, until the princess explained that she wanted a friend with similar ideals, someone who, like her, practiced the sword. She even added that what she really wanted was a rival with whom to compete and grow. Charlotte confessed that until now, her only goal had been to surpass Lady Elna, but that goal was practically unattainable. Elna was always too far ahead, and there was no way to keep up. However, with Lest, who was her age and seemed to be advancing a little faster than her, she felt she would finally have the chance to improve and become stronger. Lest hesitated for a moment, remembering his firm decision not to get too involved with the main characters of the game. But fate seemed determined to drag him towards them. In the end, he couldn't refuse the princess's insistence, and besides, how could he reject a request from someone of her rank? When he accepted, Charlotte's happiness was evident. She had sincerely wished for this friendship, and now she had it. For his part, Les was also surprised, but not displeased. The idea of sharing a path with her was something he hadn't expected, but was excited about. After they officially became sword partners, the princess had a rather absurd idea. She wanted Les to call her casually, using her nickname, Char. This shocked him, as he felt such familiarity was excessive, considering the status difference between them. Charlotte immediately reprimanded him, assuring him she didn't care what anyone else thought. If she said it was okay, then it simply was. He remembered then how stubborn Charlotte could be in a game, a young woman who never backed down once she made a decision. Therefore, he had no choice but to agree to her request and drop the formalities. Thus, the person he had been trying to avoid all this time ended up becoming an unexpected friend. Now the question remained, would this be a benefit to him, or just a new source of trouble? The next day, after her visit, she bid farewell to everyone with a proper formality. As the princess set off for the capital, the Marquis couldn't hide his frustration that of all possible people, it was Les who had captured the heiress's attention. As if that weren't enough, he also reprimanded the twins for endangering the Albion family with their actions. The Marquis's wife came to her son's defense, arguing that while they put the princess at risk, they did so because they were following their father's orders to win her favor. But the Marquis refused to accept that explanation. What annoyed him even more was that, because of the twins, the princess had ended up interested in his most useless son. All of this made Les uncomfortable and irritated, as he had never imagined his family would make such a fuss over something like this. Meanwhile, the twins tried to justify themselves to their father, saying that the princess's interest in Les was based on a lie. It seemed impossible to them that he could have defeated a hurricane wolf alone. However, since the princess had stated she saw it with her own eyes, the Marquis couldn't openly doubt it. Still, the twins insisted that Les had only delivered the final blow after they had weakened the monster before passing out. They argued that what Les had done was take advantage of the confusion and deceive the princess, something they considered unforgivable. Although their story lacked logic, the Marquis, still in denial, preferred to convince himself that it was true. Les looked at them with frustration, remembering that, in reality, his brother's attacks hadn't even scratched the wolf. He was determined not to let them take the credit for his victory. But the Marquis refused to even listen to him, ordering him to be quiet. This time, however, Les was not willing to be pushed around anymore. His firmness and seriousness surprised his father, who had never seen him so determined. To check if he was right, and if he was really as strong as he claimed, the Marquis ordered him to face both Edward and Sidor in a duel at the same time and emerge victorious. If he was truly the one who defeated the wolf. If Les was telling the truth, beating them should be easy, since his brothers hadn't been able to handle the monster. The twins were thrilled to hear this, convinced they would defeat him quickly. Although a 2-on-1 was against chivalrous honor, They were sure that even a goddess would approve of such a challenge if it served to unmask their brother. The truth was that individually, Ed and Sid were almost on the level of the Hurricane Wolf, so under normal conditions, Les would have no chance against both of them together. But things had changed since the day before. After taming the wolf and obtaining its powers, the logic was no longer the same. Now, with an overflowing confidence, Les was sure he could defeat them without difficulty, something that astonished his entire family. Just before the duel began, an unexpected guest appeared, Elna. To everyone's surprise, she offered to be the official witness for the duel between the brothers. The Marquis was perplexed to see her, as he didn't expect her visit until the next training session. Elna immediately explained that she had received a message from Estella, who told her that her students had been attacked by a hurricane wolf. Upon learning they had managed to repel it, she decided to come at once to personally check on them. When she arrived, she heard that the 3 students she was training were about to duel, so she thought it appropriate to supervise the confrontation. When she mentioned her 3 students, the Marquis realized that Elna had also been teaching Les in addition to Ed and Sid. She confirmed it easily, clarifying that she was doing it because Les had asked with such determination that she decided to supervise his training. The revelation stunned both the twins and the Marquis himself. With a serious gesture, Elna made it clear that her decision was personal and that compared to the time she dedicated to the twins, what she had invested in Les was minimal. And even considering all that, she confessed that she personally didn't believe Les could beat both of them. For that very reason, she wanted to know where the confidence he was now showing came from. As his teacher, Elna also wanted to confirm it for herself. Hearing this, the Marquis felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps Les wasn't as talented as the princess had thought. However, Les knew that Elna had watched him grow all this time, so he was sure she understood he wasn't someone to boast of confidence or power without basis. Aware that his mentor was only testing him, he made the decision to prove his power, to prove his worth not only to his family, but also to her. As the duel was about to begin, Les moved to his position. Seeing the wooden sword in his hands, the boys immediately understood he was telling the truth about being Elna's disciple. However, while his was simple wood, the twins' weapons had been forged for real combat. This made him a bit nervous, although at the same time, it piqued his curiosity about what his brothers were thinking. The reason Les was so sure he could defeat them was the new power he had acquired. Thanks to it, he now possessed enhanced physical abilities and mastery of wind magic. Although since he was confident he could win, he had no intention of using it at that moment, much less revealing the true extent of his taming power yet, as it would only bring him trouble. Besides, his secret weapon wasn't limited to wine magic. There was much more power he could attain sooner or later. Finally, the duel began, and the twins launched the first attack, convinced they would take Les down in an instant. They were fast and strong, but his agility had improved as much as theirs. Seeing him block, every blow left them stunned. They never imagined their brother could face them like this. They then tried to coordinate better, and when one of them found an opening, they sought to end the fight with a single blow. Ed tried to destroy the wooden sword with his large steel greatsword, believing it would be impossible to block. Les saw the perfect opportunity to use his secret weapon, magic infusion. By channeling magic into his weapon, he managed to withstand the attack. Ed's astonishment was so great that he immediately demanded to know what he had done. Les didn't hesitate to answer him. The technique was an advanced form of mana control that allowed one to reinforce an object by infusing it with magical energy into its tiniest cracks, thus increasing its resistance. For someone like Ed, who only knew how to brandish his sword without refining his power, this was incomprehensible. His words only served to enrage him further. In reality, magic infusion was a technique Les already knew from his past life in the game. It was a powerful and versatile art, reserved for top-tier classes, that required both vast magical power and delicate control. After training his magic every day, he had managed to master it, and thanks to the energy boost he got from taming the Hurricane Wolf, he could now use it in a real battle. Furthermore, the taming ability granted him another skill. By circulating magic throughout his body, he was able to enhance his physical capabilities. This allowed him to combine body enhancement with magic infusion, giving him an advantage in both strength and his weapon's performance. His brothers, who had despised him for years, couldn't believe he was now stronger and more skilled than them. After several minutes of failed attacks, the twins were exhausted and didn't know what to do. They had wasted their opportunity, and it was now Les' turn to show what he could really do. Without hesitation, he counterattacked confidently, a smile on his face. Every one of his strikes amazed his brothers even more. When they tried to respond, Les dodged with ease, mocking how obvious their movements were. Taking advantage of the opening in their stances, he struck them without difficulty. The Marquis, witnessing the scene, was speechless. How was it possible that Lest, who only possessed the gift of taming, could move like that? Even his mother couldn't believe what she was seeing. Meanwhile, Elna watched him intently. She sensed that Lest's growth in the last month defied all logic. There was something about him that not even she could comprehend. But she also knew that Edward and the others still had cards up their sleeves. The overwhelming power of their abilities could reverse the efforts of a simple commoner in an instant. And if Les couldn't overcome that, he wouldn't be able to advance any further. He knew that to win this duel, he had only two options: knock his rivals unconscious or force them to surrender. The first was simpler, but if he did it with a single blow, he risked them making excuses, as had happened with the wolf. Therefore, he was determined to prove beyond a doubt who was truly superior. The tension grew. On the field, Les noticed the change in the air. His brothers were more agitated, shouting at him not to underestimate them. They claimed they had only been holding back so far, and that when they used their ultimate cards, they would defeat him in an instant. Moments later, the twins began to display their individual skills: Rockfall Cascade and High-Speed Dance. However, Les was already expecting this. Like him, his brothers also had specialized skills adapted to their weapons, although he had Lightning Strike as a countermeasure. It was, after all, a basic skill that wouldn't have much effect, and in terms of power and speed, it fell far short of his brother's specialized abilities. At this rate, Les was aware that his brothers could overwhelm and surpass him without giving him a chance, which clearly showed the decisive difference between those who possess combat skills and those who do not. Although he hadn't planned to use his other secret weapon yet, he had no choice but to decide to use a specialized ability at that moment. With total concentration, he activated his wind magic, enveloping his sword in currents that vibrated at ultra-high speeds. This ability replicated the ultimate edge and was called Matu Kazutachi. With it, Les was able to effortlessly cut through his twin brother's sword, leaving his father and mother speechless. The twin fell back, stumbling, terrified by Les' surprising skill. And so, with the surrender of Edward and Sidor, Elna confirmed that the winner of the duel was none other than Lest. The twins' mother couldn't believe that a concubine's son like Lest had defeated her children. Meanwhile, the Marquis left the area, frustrated by what had happened. The twins ran after him, trying to explain the situation. As soon as they had all retreated, Elna approached to congratulate Lest on his performance. She hadn't doubted his claim of defeating the Hurricane Wolf, but the results surprised her enormously. Humbly, Lest expressed that he was just happy not to have shown a fight unworthy of one of Elna's students. However, considering that the twins were also her students, Elna laughed at his comment, though she hoped this experience would motivate them to train harder. Regardless of the outcome, she couldn't be more proud of Lest. With the duel finished, Elna expressed that she had several questions about Lest's techniques, which made him nervous. However, she decided not to interrogate him completely, limiting herself to one question. Observing the moment when Ed and the others were about to use their skills, she noticed that Lest hesitated for a moment, wondering if he was considering a countermeasure other than destroying their weapons. And it was true. Lest could have handled them without using Matu Kazutachi, although completely blocking their powerful attacks would have been very difficult. Lest was sure that he could have at least deflected the trajectory of their first blows with his wooden sword. However, this would have risked causing friendly fire and brought several problems. First, his brothers might refuse to acknowledge his power. Second, they could have been seriously injured. Although inevitable in a duel, Les wanted to avoid future complaints. That's why he decided to destroy their weapons using Matu Kazutachi, and Elna seemed to perfectly understand his reasoning. With this, Les secured a certain prestige within the Albion family. Knowing he wouldn't have achieved it without the power of the Hurricane Wolf, he decided to thank his new pet. He opened a portal to his interdimensional world and called for Gale. The monster wanted to come out of the portal, but Les decided to go into its world to prevent that. As soon as he entered, he thanked Gale for the wind magic, thanks to which he was able to defeat his brothers. Although satisfied with the duel, Les knew he had to think about the future. Suddenly, a panel appeared informing him that he had reached his slot limit for taming. To tame a new monster, he needed to increase his limit. Les was already expecting this. although taming was powerful. The number of slots was limited. To subdue other monsters besides Gale, he had to increase his level. As he remembered from the game, he could only tame 5 monsters in total, each one very strong, granting him considerable power. But if he neglected his own training, he would become weak if his monsters were defeated first. To avoid this, Lest planned to level up at all costs. Although midnight training helped to grow more efficiently, he needed to face monsters and gain experience. By taming Gale, his strength was approaching B rank, despite being C rank himself, which would allow him to handle unforeseen situations on his own. However, he still wanted to hunt monsters in the Arkwood Forest, but his family probably wouldn't let him in again. He already had his next target in mind, a monster that lived deep in the forest. The next day, his problems began to resolve in a surprising way. Meanwhile, the Marquis was wondering how things had turned out this way. 3 months ago, at the Divine Oracle ceremony, his son Lest had received the taming ability. For the Albion family, famous for generations of elite swordsmen, it was a useless, trash-rank ability, completely worthless in combat. For the Marquis, this was nothing less than a disgrace. Therefore, immediately after the Divine Oracle ceremony, the Marquis issued a notice to all relevant parties, informing them that Lest had been removed as a candidate for the next head of the house. By demonstrating his willingness to cut off, even his own flesh and blood without mercy, the Marquis sought to show his strength like that of a lion. However, Lest had grown into a warrior capable of defeating even a hurricane wolf and ended up catching the attention of a second princess. At that moment, the Marquis felt frustrated by his own decisions. Lest's reputation had risen, and his decision to remove him as a candidate could be seen as a mistake, something he had to avoid at all costs. Still, the Marquis forced himself to believe that he had made no mistake, as someone who only possesses the taming ability could never lead the proud Albion family. Therefore, to not be embarrassed in front of everyone, he planned to prove that Lest was incapable of being the next head, no matter what happened. He was so bent on this that he even considered eliminating him entirely, in both name and reality. Furthermore, he reminded himself that the house had an older son attending the academy who had been chosen for a high-rank swordsmanship ability. The Marquis was convinced that as long as his eldest son demonstrated his power, the future of the Albion family would be in good hands. Although he already planned to expel Lest from the house, doing so would be complicated due to the princess's favor towards him. Still, as cruel as it was, the Marquis decided to send him back to the Arkwood Forest, hoping that the monsters there would take care of his son. What the Marquis didn't know was that for someone like Lest, who was looking to level up quickly, this was the best possible offer he could receive. Still, Lest wondered why his father would give him such an order, letting him go alone to investigate such a dangerous forest. Although the Marquis tried to justify it with logical explanations, Lest didn't believe him and knew his father had hidden intentions. However, at that moment, his father's true intentions no longer mattered. Considering this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Lest immediately accepted the offer and ventured into the forest to level up as quickly as possible. The forest was divided into 3 layers: outer, middle, and deep. The area assigned to him this time was only the easiest, the outer layer. Lest immediately understood that his father knew sending him directly to the middle or deep layers would have been suspicious. The monsters in the outer layer were generally weak, mostly low E rank to mid D rank. However, Lest didn't mind facing as many monsters as he could, especially with Gale at his side. Besides, one of the unconventional effects of his taming ability was that it strengthened not only the tamer, but also the tamed monster. The stronger Lest became, the greater the empowerment multiplier. Thanks to this, he was able to face without difficulty every monster that approached him until a Firebird, a high D rank monster, appeared out of nowhere. Since his wooden sword couldn't reach it, Lest saw the perfect opportunity to practice his wind magic. Fortunately, just as with his sword, he managed to defeat the Firebird in a short time. As he began to level up, a pleasant sensation ran through his body, as if he were becoming lighter, something he hadn't felt when fighting Gale the other day. In addition, the experience from monsters defeated by Gale was also naturally transferred to Lest. Thanks to this, his level continued to rise steadily as he practiced his wind magic, something difficult to train at the mansion. Thus, at an astonishing speed, Lest continued to grow stronger. A week had passed since the start of the investigation in the Arkwood Forest. Occasionally, powerful creatures like Gale appeared, but day after day, Lest and Gale managed to defeat the monsters together, to the point where they no longer posed any real Challenge. If Les wanted to level up even more, he would probably have to venture a little deeper into the middle and deep layers. However, since he had not yet received permission from his home that day, his father told him that starting tomorrow, he would begin exploring deeper areas. This surprised Les, who had never expected such an instruction. In his mind, his father had possibly become impatient seeing him handle the outer layers so easily. Once again, Les was grateful that his father gave him the order at the perfect time. Just to be sure, he asked if he could really go to the middle layers, where the monsters were much stronger. The Marquis didn't hesitate to say yes, and added that he was doing it because he had great expectations for him. What the Marquis didn't know was that he was actually doing his least favorite son a favor. At dawn the next day, Les and Gale were excited to continue their training now in the middle layers of the forest. In the outer layers, most monsters were low E rank to mid D rank, but in the middle layers, even high C rank monsters could appear. Still, those enemies were not enough to stop them. Before Les knew it, he had reached a B-level strength thanks to the stronger monsters he had faced in recent days. Thus, leveling up steadily, another week passed. Then, without any warning, a monster they didn't expect appeared. It was a mid-B rank monster and was really problematic even in the game. Since Les wanted to finish it off as quickly as possible, he called Gale to help him, combining their powers, especially the slashing armor of wind. With less magic, they managed to strike the monster. However, just like in the game, the Cyclops was about to use its I-beam ability, a high-powered special attack. Les knew the timing of this attack well, so he knew he could dodge it without any problem, but instead he decided to face it head-on, planning to intercept it at all costs. So far, he had only tested this technique against weaker enemies, but with this Cyclops in front of him, Les was excited to test his skills. And that's how Les managed to take down this enormous creature with a single blow. Upon reaching the required value, his level increased again, which meant he could finally tame another monster. Les was excited to use this card again, as he could finally tame his second monster. For days, he had already decided on his next prey, and it resided in the deep layers of the Arkwood Forest. He still hadn't received permission from his father to enter, but he couldn't help wondering if he really needed it. Although he wanted to improve his skills, Les decided to return to the mansion for the time being. He was sure that tomorrow, he and Gale would face the strongest enemy they had ever met, the legendary creature of a dragon. The next day, although Les had not received official authorization from his father to explore the depths of the forest, he decided to head to his destination anyway. After passing through the outer and middle layers, they fought for an hour against B-rank monsters to venture even deeper into the forest. After several hours of combat, they finally reached the heart of their journey. Reaching a clearing, Les showed his excitement as they waited for their opponent. Suddenly, a powerful gust of wind blew, alerting them. Moments later, a black dragon appeared suddenly, flying out of an abandoned church. Its roar echoed throughout the area, but instead of feeling nervous, Les was excited to face such a massive creature. For being so young and radiating such an overwhelming aura truly impressed Les. In the game, it was only a tenth of its maximum size, but when fully grown, it surpassed 100 meters and could even destroy everything around it. In the original story, it was controlled by a demon general and wreaked havoc on the capital, leaving much of it destroyed. The heroes were defeated, and it was thought the entire nation could be annihilated. However, the dragon managed to break free from the demon's control and help the people, using its power, with its last breath on the wounded and affected populations. Just as it was dying, the black dragon spoke, surprising everyone. It revealed that its ancestors had served as divine protectors of the kingdom, legendary dragons that defended the populations from demons and creatures. Therefore, this dragon wished to prevent causing destruction with its own power. Finally, the dragon concluded its tale and sank into an eternal sleep with quiet dignity. Although it was an unavoidable defeat event in the game and not very popular among players, it was etched in Les' mind. Even though the dragon appeared only once in the game, Les felt a special connection to it. Remembering that he had been reborn as Les, his first thought was that he would use his taming power to control this dragon, avoiding the tragedy of the original story. For months after gaining the taming ability, the moment had finally arrived. But to achieve it, he had to defeat it with all his strength, or else he would be the one to die at the end of the fight. In this world, dragons possess immense magical power, considered kings of magic capable of transforming reality. They grow quickly by absorbing magic, reaching the age of Super S rank if fed by demon generals. As a hatchling, it should be just an upper beer rank. With Gale and his combined strength, Les was sure that victory was not out of his reach. Thus began the battle, with the dragon finally taking the initiative. Although a little nervous, Les and Gale wanted to show the creature their true power. Without hesitation, they charged to attack, using this Cyclone Blast technique. Les hoped to catch the monster off guard. However, to his surprise, with just a flap of its wings, the dragon managed to counter it. Les maintained an optimistic attitude and attacked again. While they fought, the dragon began to prepare its massive destructive magic, a lethal power. Still, Les felt no fear, because as an experienced player, he knew that as long as he dodged it, it wouldn't harm him. Taking advantage of an opening, with his wind magic, Les initiated an aerial combat. Thanks to his enhanced physique and plus magic, he managed to strike the legendary monster. As it roared in pain, Les ordered Gale to attack again, but not even his large claws managed to penetrate the dragon's skin. As soon as the black dragon rose up again, Les prepared himself, knowing that the real fight was about to begin. For the next few minutes, Les and Gale did everything possible to defeat the creature. The imposing black dragon, which had descended from the sky with force, seemed to have given up the skies for a moment. In exchange, the black dragon poured all its strength into the ground battle. Les knew well that if he let his guard down, even for an instant, defeat would mercilessly claim him. However, in the midst of combat, a strange sensation arose, an exhilaration Les had never experienced. All he could do was face the monster as if it were a puppet of the demonic horde. Therefore, Les considered this a rare and perfect opportunity to fight with honor. No matter how difficult it seemed, he would do everything possible not to let this opportunity escape. After all, the thrill of facing a formidable opponent was peerless, and his grip on the wooden sword tightened naturally. Without hesitation or fear, Les wanted to face the monster directly, as a part of him craved this more than ever. But more importantly, he wanted to tame the black dragon at all costs, as it was the only way to save it from a sad fate. With much effort and dedication, Les prepared to secure victory, no matter that every attack from the black dragon was fierce, but it always left its defenses open. Therefore, dodging without taking damage was not so difficult for Gale and Les. However, Les felt that something was not quite right. Even being young, this monster was a true king of magic. As he continued fighting, Les noticed something surprising. The dragon wasn't actually trying to hit them. It was almost as if it wanted them to notice. As they stood motionless, the monster was about to unleash a breath attack. Although numerous powerful and unavoidable attacks had come so far, Les understood that this breath was the real danger, and they had to avoid it at all costs to not die. At that moment, Les realized that taming was not just about overpowering a monster, but something more than just defeating it. When the black dragon launched its deadly breath, Les could only stand still as the attack advanced. The breath was scorching, but that wasn't the worst part. The most terrifying thing was the immense amount of magic the dragon possessed. About to be evaporated, Les wondered if he had really misinterpreted everything. But to his surprise, the dragon's breath caused him no harm. It turned out the dragon had never wanted to harm them from the beginning. The strange feeling Les had perceived during all the missed attacks was not wrong. The breath was his only concern. But Les thought he could withstand it, and his hunch turned out to be correct. Although it looked like a deadly attack, it was empty inside, only covered by dense magic, a control that only a king of magic could achieve. The real question now was, what was the black dragon's real intention? It not only demonstrated vast power and wisdom, but also showed ancestral respect for protecting people and preserving dignity. Although Les had not killed the dragon, the game now allowed him to tame it. They had been tested all along. The dragon, guardian of its ancestors' memory, did not want its power to be used to harm the innocent. Realizing this and respecting its pride, Les managed to make the dragon accept being tamed. Without hesitation, Les proceeded with the plan, explaining to the dragon that he came to protect its pride. Understanding that Les would not harm it, the dragon lowered its head, allowing him to pet it. As he placed his hands on its snout, the taming magic activated immediately, and Les was about to make one of the most majestic creatures in the world a part of his power. During the process, Les felt every part of himself, even his senses, awaken. He couldn't believe such a strong power existed. After a while, the taming was complete, and Les received a part of the dragon's power called the Dragon's Blessing. This power granted him great resistance to status ailments and advanced control of magic. Les was happy, because in the game, the black dragon could turn magic into any phenomenon, and now he could too. Although he wished to learn the concept interference abilities of the dragon, it was still young and hadn't developed them. But with growth, Les was sure to gain more power, and just imagining it excited him. Since he couldn't keep calling the creature dragon, he decided to name it Noir, and the dragon seemed to love the name so much that it roared loudly. Now that they had successfully tamed Noir, even Gale couldn't hold back tears of victory. With two of the most powerful monsters in the world under his command, Les was ready to achieve great things with his new companions. Having completed his objective, Les decided to return home. He couldn't take the dragon like this, so he left it in his interdimensional residence, where it would live with Gale. However, Noir didn't want to leave the forest, reminding Les that the Arkwood Forest was full of powerful beasts that attracted evil magic, and that demons were often summoned there to hunt for magic. In the game, their strength and cruelty stood out, and they were deeply linked to Les' dark path. This is where Noir intervenes, since in the game, he was the one who purified the evil magic, preventing demons from being summoned. Noir had been protecting people from the shadows all this time, and Les understood perfectly why he couldn't simply go with them. Therefore, Les decided to leave Noir behind, although he asked that if he ever needed his strength, he would be there to help him. Although Noir couldn't speak the human language, his subtle nod gave Les assurance. At that moment, Les managed to create a bond that constantly linked master and beast. In critical situations, the bond would alert the other to danger, and when the time comes, both would know to come to each other's aid. Seeing Noir fly back to his base, Les felt motivated to try even harder, because once he tamed a few more, he could summon beasts like in the game. As they returned home, Les couldn't help but feel proud of himself and Gale for having tamed Noir, as this gave him a huge boost in his stats, in addition to the dragon's blessing. But also, since he had also obtained a shrinking spell, Les decided to try it on Gale, and the result was quite adorable. At that size, Les could now keep Gale at his home. In the mansion, however, while they were practicing with the spell, a monster suddenly appeared and attacked Les. At that moment, Les began to face monsters one after another. But this was no ordinary monster. From its appearance, it was on Noir's level. The hardest part for Les was its incredible physical resistance. For someone who fights with a wooden sword like him, facing such a monster was an extremely unfavorable combat. Although he didn't want to fight anymore, with a monster's speed, there was no way to escape. Therefore, he had no choice but to fight. Meanwhile, Gale also came to his master's aid using his own abilities, and it seemed that magic really affected this monster. While they used their inner magic, Les tried to hit the creature, sure that he could cause damage. To Les' surprise, magic flowed through the world, much more easily than usual, probably thanks to the dragon's blessing. With this, he hoped to be able to perform the maneuver without any problem. Although it was still new to him, Les did surprisingly well on his first try. With a single blow, he killed the creature, leaving a complete hole in its stomach. Gale, next to Les, was shocked by the scene as it surpassed all his expectations. At that moment, Les finally understood that his abilities were not just the swordsmanship taught by Elna, the magic from taming Gale and Noir, but the combination of both. They would forge his path to the top and make him the strongest warrior this world has ever seen. The only thing he needed to do now was to move forward with determination and never look back.